What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. Today I just really want to talk about what you should be considering when starting a new system, kind of the process and the layout and some of the things you should just be thinking about in general, and also to kind of give you some tools to not be stressed out and to approach it in a very efficient way. Now, this is going to apply to those of you who are just starting out in the hobby, but also those of you who are kind of done with your first tank and moving on to your second or third. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, the very first thing I recommend to everybody is to just write everything down. It doesn't have to be in a specific order. You can make categories if you want, but just write down everything that you want the system to do, manifold-wise, what do you want to add to the manifold, what kind of pump you want, what kind of power heads. Just write all this stuff down. And the reason why I say that is to just unload your brain. Dump it all on paper. That way you don't have to spend tons of time worrying about maybe if you miss something. So just write everything down, and then you can move on to the next step. Now, if you want to take that a little bit farther, you can go ahead and draw everything out in Paint, or you can use a special editing program, 3D modeling, whatever you want. It's really up to you, but the simplest form is just to write everything out, put it in categories, and that seems to be the easiest for me. But if you're more of a visual person, by all means, go ahead and draw it. Once you have your system laid out, the one thing you need to understand is that you can't remember every little thing. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be an extra elbow or a T-fitting. You might be missing a ball valve or a union. Just understand that it's always best to purchase extra, because you can always return them later if you don't need them. Now, if you are getting special fittings offline, I definitely recommend ordering 10 to 15 more of like unions and T's and end caps and stuff like that, just because you never know if you need them, and also get extra PVC if you are purchasing it offline. But if you are getting stuff at the local fish store or at your Home Depot or Lowe's, just understand that purchasing a few extra will save you a couple trips to the store. All right, once you have all that taken care of, the next thing you want to do is have a time frame when you want to build a system. Now, if you're just starting out in the hobby, I highly recommend giving yourself 30 days. And the reason for that is you want to make sure you not only get enough research in, you get all the equipment, but the most important thing is to get the rock and get it cured prior to putting it in the system. And the reason for this is, if you've ever had rock like Pucani, which is a very popular rock and I personally love it, is the fact that it comes out of the ocean, it has a lot of dead stuff on it, and it needs to be cured. The last thing you ever want to do is put Pucani in a reef tank without it being cycled first or cured, better yet. And yes, if you've ever seen that reef tank that has just thrown Pucani in there and threw some light over it, you will guarantee have a shit storm of algae within the next few days or a week or two. It's just inevitable with a rock like that because of all the die-off, and you'll be fighting that die-off and nutrients or excess nutrients for several months. Now, the best thing you could do is to go ahead and take your rock, regardless of what you get, Reef Saver or Pucani, put it in a bin once you kind of establish how much you need, and then go ahead and let that cure with salt water, heat, and flow with a cover on it for 30 days. And that is why I give the 4 weeks for everybody who is just starting a new system, because even if the rock isn't 100% cured within that 30 days, at least doing that 50% or 100% water change every week for those 4 weeks will get rid of a ton of that nutrients and excess detritus that you won't have to deal with once you put it in the tank. So that is my recommendation for those of you who are just starting out. All right, for those of you who are transitioning from one tank to another, we tend to actually go from a smaller to a bigger tank. That's just kind of how we are in this hobby. I mean, I started off with a 20-gallon, and now I'm going to be going to a 300, so that's just kind of how we are around here. But I definitely recommend you still do the same thing. Add all the rock that you intend to add in that tank to a barrel, fill it up with water, salt, heat, and flow, and it also wouldn't hurt to add a piece of live rock from your current system in order to seed all that new rock. It definitely aids in the process and helps with the cycling a little bit faster. And then, of course, do your weekly or bi-weekly water changes to get all that excess detritus out from the new rock. All right, now that we got the rock situation out of the way, let's go ahead and fast forward 4 weeks, and now it's the build day. What do? You have all your PVC fittings, the extra ones, the extra PVC pipe, the glue, the cutters, all your pumps, fittings, sump, all that kind of stuff. What do? Well, the best thing is to go ahead and start with the return pump. I always find it's easier to build off the return pump, going to a manifold, then going from your manifold to your tanks or refugium or whatever you have your system set up to. And then once all that stuff is dry fitted, I've got to stress this, dry fitted, do not glue anything until the entire system has been put together, test fitted, and everything lines up properly. The last thing you want to do is drop a bunch of money into a ton of ball valves and then just glue them on there and then find that you put them in the wrong spot, they're not lined up properly, they're crooked or whatever, just doesn't fit right, and then you just wasted all that money. So dry fit everything and then finally glue it together. All right, once your system is completely glued together, you can go ahead and test fill it. Now, some people say, hey, you got to wait 24 hours for the PVC cement. I find that to be a little baloney. I have PVC glued parts, fittings together, and filled it up within 10 or 15 minutes without zero issues. And I've also done some work with systems with coral already in them, fish already in them, and ran it through and never had any loss or death. Now, it could be different on a 150 to 200 gallon system opposed to if you're working on like a 20 gallon cube or something like that and you have a bunch of PVC. There could be an issue with how potent that could be in the system. But I find that if glue drops into the water, it actually just floats on the surface. It never actually goes into the water and mixes or anything like that. So you can go ahead and test fill as soon as you're done and just check for any kind of leaks. If you have a small drip or a small run from an elbow, you can go ahead and add some silicone, but honestly, over time, salt creep in general will just seal up any kind of leaks that you might have. Unless it's a big one and you have a constant drip, that'd be something you might consider cutting and replacing that whole fitting. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention regarding drips. If you have one that is dripping anywhere near power cables or close to a wall where it can run down to an outlet, you need to take that in consideration. I think any drips that are really acceptable are ones that are already over the sump or can be caught by a plastic container or a refugium, or you have, like I said, a sump there that can catch any kind of drips. Those are okay. The ones on the back of the tank, underneath the stand where there's power outlets and stuff like that, you need to address those immediately. I would not wait for them to completely seal up with silicone or with salt creep. That's stuff that you really don't want to take any chances when it comes to electrical components and water. All right, there's one more thing that I want to address regarding filling up the system, and that is what type of water are you using? Are you using tap water or RODI water? Now, some of us who have containers, 100 gallon, 200 gallon containers that we have filled up previously with RODI that we just transferred to the new system, that's fine and dandy if you have the space and the ability to do so. But 99% of the people coming into this hobby just use tap water to test fill. And sometimes they use that same tap water to start their system. Now, I have done both. I've seen both results. And when it comes to a new system that has never been used, you've cured the rock and you're adding that rock to a tank that has just tap water in it, I have found there to be no negative issues regarding algae or anything like that. But that is with about 300 TDS. Now, some people have like 400, 500, 600 TDS, some really bad water. And in every tap water, or all tap water around the country and around the world, is going to be different, have different amounts of metals in it. Now, I definitely would not recommend, if you're taking down a system and then transitioning that to salt water that has been tap water before. It's just not a good idea. I think that'd be too big of a shock for the coral. So if you are going to be transitioning and you don't have enough time to get the RODI water going, and it's kind of have to move everything at one time, I would do at least 60% RODI and 30 or 40% of tap water. I've done that on the 125 gallon Reef when I transitioned it, and I didn't have any issues. But you definitely don't want to go full tap water. You can probably run into some serious issues depending on how potent it is. That's pretty much all I really want to cover regarding the tap water versus RODI when starting a system. I feel that you guys can make a decision based on what your TDS is and where you live. And believe it or not, guys, people who live in the same town have totally different TDS levels. It's just the way the pipes are, how old they are, how long the water's been sitting in there. It's just going to be different. So so basically what I'm saying is, just because it works for you, it doesn't mean it works for everybody else. So just keep that in mind when you come trolling comment section, picking on people and telling people that they're doing the wrong things. Just understand it's different for everybody, all right? The next thing I want to talk about is adding rock to a system that already has water in it. Remember that the water will be displaced when you add the rock, so remember to take water out ahead of time or you'll end up overflowing the sump and then getting it all over the floor. But some people actually test fill the system and then drain it completely, which I personally like to do, and then just aquascape with dry rock, or better yet, just aquascape with a rock not being submerged underwater. That way you could add your epoxy and stuff like that the way you want, super glue, etc., 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 and then refill the tank with RODI or tap water, whatever you so choose for your initial setup. All right, now that your system has been aquascaped, you have it the way you like, everything is running, temperature is perfect, specific gravity 1.025 to 1.026, everything is running perfectly. Now what do? Well, you just let the system run. You can choose to have the lights on if you want. I personally leave the lights off on my system for about a week. It's just personal preference. Some people get a pretty significant diatom bloom, especially on the sand that you just added into the tank, because the part of the curing process is to add a film, like a biofilm on the rock, that will help prevent diatom blooms and prevent algae from sticking to the rock when that's what the curing process is for, pretty much. And you know, since you just added the sand, if you didn't cure it previously, you tend to get a pretty significant diatom bloom, a newly set up system. So if you just keep the lights off, there really isn't any light feeding that algae, and it'll just go through the process as normal. One thing that I tend to do, and I've found pretty successful, is even if the system or rock has been cured for that 4 weeks and you just plopped it in, I don't add fish right away. I give it about a week or two, and then I start adding fish. And it's just personal preference. I find that the system still has an adjustment phase. Your skimmer still has to break in, and everything's kind of balanced out, kind of needs to balance out before you start adding any livestock. But again, you could definitely get away with just adding the rock that's been cured and adding a fish. Heck, people get away with just adding dry rock and then adding a fish and just seeing what happens. It depends on the water volume, and it depends on kind of what you've done prior to that. It's so many different aspects, but personally, I think just waiting an extra week for the system to kind of settle in before adding anything is just a safe way to go, and I've never found it to ever be an issue. Now, along the lines of fish, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, it's always a good idea to quarantine your fish 4 weeks prior to adding it to the system, and that could be something that you do when you purchase your rock. Go ahead and purchase your fish and purchase a quarantine setup and quarantine your fish throughout the entire cycling process, and then once your system is set up, your fish are out of quarantine, and then you can enjoy the hobby from there on out. It's personal preference, but I will say that I regret not doing that, because you've got your system up running, you've already cured it for 4 weeks, now you got to wait another 4 to 5 weeks as long as everything, or better yet, all the fish get through quarantine without any issues. And there's nothing worse than having a fish in for 3 weeks, having it break out with ick or another parasite, and then having to cure that fish and then start the quarantine process over again once the parasite is gone. So it could be weeks or months until you add a fish if you don't kind of plan ahead. Now, before I let you guys go, I just want to let you know that I can visually see all the comments coming in of people saying that I've never quarantined my fish and have never had an ick or a parasite outbreak of any sort. And I can also see people saying that I've never cured my rock, I've just simply threw it in my tank and never had an algae issue. Now, what do I say to that? And I'm not going to reply to any of them. I'm just simply going to leave you with this. The hobby is a game of Russian roulette. You're only going to get so many trigger pulls before the bullet goes off. And unfortunately, it's going to happen when you least expect it. An example of that is a friend of mine has a beautiful 220-gallon tank. It has 15 beautiful tangs in it, and he has never quarantined a fish before in his life. Now, he went ahead and went to his local fish store, purchased another tang, added it to his system, and he lost every single fish in 3 weeks. And guess what? His tank has now been broken down. It is up on Craigslist, and I am that type of person that will go through and buy that system from you, offering you shit for pennies, and then I'm going to go ahead and resell it and make some money on it. So just understand that there is no guarantees in this hobby. The only thing you can do is prevent as much as you can via Apex, quarantining, taking the steps to cure your rock, everything. Just prevention is what this hobby is about. All right. Either way, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Peace.